At Thanksgiving dinner, my billionaire grandfather asked, "How are you enjoying the $850,000 beach house I put in your name?" I went silent. "Grandpa, I've been renting a basement room for 2 years." He slowly turned toward my sister, and she dropped the house keys under the table. Grandfather's dining table seated 14, and every Thanksgiving it did. The cranberry sauce sat in the same crystal dish it had been in since before I was born, and the rolls came from the bakery on Clifton Avenue that my grandmother had ordered from for 40 years before she died. I sat between Theo and my cousin's wife, across from Ingrid, who was cutting her turkey with the steady hand of someone who had not yet been asked the wrong question. Arlo carved from the head of the table, 78 years old, worth more money than most towns I had lived in, and he still used the same carving knife his father had given him. He carved slowly, the way he did everything, with the patience of a man who had learned that the fastest way to lose something is to rush toward it. 14 plates passed down the table, wine poured, rolls broken. The conversation moved the way Thanksgiving conversations always move, in circles around the same topics: someone's new job, someone's kid making the honor roll, someone's kitchen renovation that was 3 weeks behind schedule. Then, between the turkey and the pie, while he was still holding the serving fork and looking at me with the casual warmth of a man who believed everything was exactly as he had arranged it, Arlo said, "How are you enjoying the beach house, sweetheart? Have you had any trouble with the water heater?" The table did not stop. Not yet. 2 of my cousins were still talking. Theo's hand was reaching for the rolls. Douglas was refilling Pearl's wine glass. The sentence floated across the table and landed in front of me like something heavy dropped from a height, and nobody heard the impact except me. "Grandpa, I have been renting a basement room for 2 years. Arlo's carving fork stopped. His hand stayed in the air. The room caught up to the sentence in pieces. One cousin stopped mid-word, then the other. Then Douglas set the wine bottle down too hard, and it rocked on the tablecloth. "What did you say?" "I do not have a beach house. I live in a basement apartment on Elm Street. I pay $650 a month. I take the bus to work." Arlo looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then his head turned, slowly, the way a searchlight turns, toward Pearl. Pearl's face drained. The color left her cheeks first and then her lips, and she set her fork and knife down simultaneously, both hands flat on the table, fingers spread, the posture of someone who has been caught and is trying to look composed while the floor opens underneath them. Arlo's head kept turning, past Pearl. To Ingrid. Ingrid's right hand moved to the purse hanging on the back of her chair. The movement was involuntary, a reflex, the hand reaching for the thing the brain knows is evidence before the mouth has decided what to say. Her fingers touched the clasp, and the purse shifted, and something inside it slid and fell. The keys hit the hardwood floor under the table, a coral-colored keychain on dark wood. The sound was small and clear, and it carried across the room the way a single note carries in a cathedral. Every person at that table heard it. My cousin Andrea looked under the table, and then looked at Ingrid, and then looked at me. Uncle Martin set his glass down without drinking. Theo's hand found mine under the tablecloth. He did not squeeze. He just placed his hand over mine and kept it there. Arlo's voice was low. "Pearl, I gave you those keys and the deed packet 2 years ago. For Vera. On her 25th birthday. You were supposed to deliver them." Pearl's hands were in her lap now, folding and unfolding the napkin. Her fingers could not stop moving. "Dad, this is not the time to discuss property matters. We are having dinner." "This is exactly the time. My granddaughter just told me she has been living in a basement for 2 years. The house I bought her is sitting somewhere with someone else in it. You had one job, Pearl. Give Vera the keys. What happened?" Pearl looked at Douglas. Douglas was looking at Arlo. Nobody was looking at Pearl the way she needed to be looked at, with forgiveness, with understanding, with the assurance that what she had done could be explained away as a misunderstanding. Nobody was offering her that. You could not handle a house like that, Vera. Pearl's voice shifted into something practiced and hard. You rent a basement. You make $36,000 a year cleaning animal cages. Your sister has a husband. She has 2 children. She needed the space. What were you going to do with an $850,000 beach house? Sit in it alone and wait for someone to visit? I did what made sense for this family. Ingrid leaned forward. You would have let it sit there empty. I used it. I kept the pipes from freezing. I maintained the yard. You take the bus to work, Vera. You could not even get to the house without asking someone for a ride. Grandpa made a nice gesture. I made sure it did not go to waste. Arlo stood. He set the carving fork on the table beside his plate, and the metal clicked against the porcelain with a finality that had nothing to do with dinner. He took his phone from his jacket pocket, walked 3 steps toward the window, and dialed. 14 people at that table watched a 78-year-old man call his attorney on Thanksgiving evening because his daughter had stolen his gift and his granddaughter had been living in a basement while her house sat occupied by the wrong person. The call lasted 4 minutes. Arlo's voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who has spent 50 years building a fortune and knows exactly how to protect what he builds. Only fragments carried back to the table. Deed. Vera Langford, County Records, Monday morning. My cousin Andrea looked at her husband. Uncle Martin was gripping his fork without eating. Theo's hand was still on mine under the tablecloth. Ingrid's chair had not moved back toward the table since the keys fell. Pearl was staring at the cranberry sauce dish as if it contained instructions for what to say next. When Arlo hung up, he walked back to the table but did not sit down. He looked at Pearl the way a father looks at a child who has done something that cannot be undone. My attorney will verify the deed on Monday. If that house is not in Vera's name exactly as I arranged it, you and I are going to have a conversation that will not happen at a dinner table. And Pearl, if I find out that house has been generating income you did not tell me about, the conversation will be worse. Pearl's face shifted. The blood that had drained earlier came back in patches, uneven, blotching across her cheeks. She had not expected Arlo to mention income. She had expected the conversation to stay on the keys, on the delivery she had failed to make. The word income told her that Arlo was already thinking 3 steps ahead, and Pearl was still standing at step 1, trying to explain why the keys were on the floor instead of in her younger daughter's hand. After dessert, which nobody ate, the table cleared in silence. I stayed in my chair. The coral keychain was still on the floor under the table, near Ingrid's chair leg. Nobody had picked it up. Ingrid had pushed her chair back 3 inches when the keys fell, the legs scraping the hardwood, and she had not moved closer to them since. I bent down and picked up the keys. The coral keychain was smooth and warm from sitting against the floor. 2 keys on a single ring. Arlo had told me, while Pearl was in the kitchen not helping with anything and Ingrid was in the bathroom, that he had the keychain custom-made to match the front door of the house. "Those were for you," he said. "The color matches the door." I picked it myself. I almost did not go to Thanksgiving. The week before, Arlo had called and said, "I want to see you, Vera. Bring your appetite." And I could not say no to him. I never could. If I had stayed home, the keys would still be in Ingrid's purse, and the basement would still be the only ceiling I knew. Theo drove me home. The roads were empty the way roads are empty on Thanksgiving night, everyone indoors, everyone with their families. And the 2 of us moving through the dark toward an apartment that I now knew was not the only roof available to me. I held the coral keychain in my palm the entire ride, turning it over, feeling the weight of 2 keys that had been cut for locks I had never touched, in a door I had never opened, in a house I had never seen. The keychain was warm from my hand, and the coral color caught the streetlights every time we passed under one. Theo drove without the radio. He took the long route home. the one through the residential streets instead of the highway, because Theo understood without being told that I needed the drive to be longer than the distance required. I needed more time with the keys in my hand before I had to decide what to do with them. Do you want to see it tonight? Tomorrow. I want to see it in daylight. Theo nodded. He did not ask anything else. He parked at my building and walked me to the door and kissed me on the forehead and said, "Call me when you are ready." He went home. I went inside. The keys went on my nightstand, coral against the wood, and I lay in bed looking at them until the streetlight outside my window shifted and the shoes on the sidewalk stopped and the neighborhood went quiet. If you have ever discovered that someone in your family was holding something that belonged to you and letting you struggle without it, you understand why I needed daylight. Make sure you are subscribed to Family Secret Tales, because what I found inside that house is only the beginning of what Pearl and Ingrid were hiding. For 2 years, I lived in a basement apartment on Elm Street. One window near the ceiling, level with the sidewalk, where I could see shoes walking past but never faces. $650 a month, 24 months, $15,600 in rent for a room where the ceiling was low enough that I could touch it standing on my toes, which I did once in the first week because I wanted to know exactly how small my world was, and after I touched it, I never tried again. I worked at Greenfield Animal Clinic, 14 miles from my apartment, veterinary assistant. $36,000 a year. The job involved holding animals still while the doctor examined them, cleaning kennels, updating files, and occasionally sitting with the dog after surgery until its breathing evened out. I loved the work. What I did not love was the math, after taxes and rent and bus fare and groceries and the phone bill and the insurance premium that took 3 days of pay every month. The number left over was the kind of number that teaches you the difference between living and surviving. Bus Route 14 every morning at 6:40. The clinic opened at 7:30 and the bus ran once an hour, so missing the 6:40 meant arriving at 8:40, which meant losing an hour of pay I could not afford to lose. I never missed it. In 2 years of basement living, I caught the 6:40 bus 480 times, and the only variable was whether the seat near the back door was open or I had to stand. On my 25th birthday, 2 years ago, Pearl called at noon. She said happy birthday and asked if I wanted to come to dinner that weekend. Nothing else. No gift. No card. No mention of a house, or keys, or anything Arlo had arranged. I waited for something more, the way you wait for a sentence to finish when someone has paused mid-thought, and when the something never came, I said thank you and hung up and went back to work. Arlo mailed a card with a check for $500, inside the card in his handwriting. He wrote, "The big gift is coming through your mother." I read that sentence standing at the mailbox in front of my apartment building. The big gift, coming through your mother. I waited a week, 2 weeks, a month. Pearl never mentioned it again. I cashed the check to cover that month's rent and told myself that $500 was generous and the note was probably Arlo being Arlo. Grand in his language, but practical in his giving. I was wrong. The big gift was an $850,000 beach house with a coral-colored front door, and it had been sitting 40 minutes from my basement with my name on the deed and my sister's furniture in the living room for 730 days. While I rode the bus and counted grocery bills and touched my ceiling once to measure the limits of what I thought I deserved, my house was there. The ocean was there. The door was there. The keys were in Ingrid's purse, and every morning Ingrid woke up in my house and looked at my ocean through my windows and went about her day as if the deed in the county clerk's office said Ingrid Langford instead of Vera. The Friday after Thanksgiving, Theo drove me to the house. I held the keys in my right hand and watched the roads change from city blocks to coastal highway. Theo drove without talking, which is what Theo does when he knows the silence is doing more work than any sentence could. He took the long route because he knew I needed more time with the keys in my hand before I had to use them. When we turned onto the street, I saw the front door before anything else. Coral colored, the exact shade of the keychain in my palm. Arlo had matched them on purpose, the way a man who builds things for a living makes sure the pieces fit. The house sat on a small lot with white siding and a yard that Ingrid had maintained because letting an $850,000 property fall apart would have raised questions she could not answer. I put the key in the lock. It turned on the first try, smooth, the way a lock turns when it has been opened 1,000 times by someone else and is finally meeting the person it was cut for. The door opened, and the house smelled like someone else's laundry detergent, and someone else's cooking, and someone else's life layered over 2 years of mornings and evenings in rooms that belonged to me. Ingrid's couch in the living room, Ingrid's curtains on the windows, a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a seashell, family photos on the hallway wall, Ingrid, her husband, her 2 kids, standing on the back porch of my house, smiling my deed. Their pictures, their life inside my walls. I walked through every room without speaking. The kitchen with granite countertops I had never touched, the master bedroom with a view of the water I had never woken up to, the guest bathroom where someone had hung towels in a color I would not have chosen, a second bedroom set up as a child's room with bunk beds and a nightlight shaped like a whale. Ingrid's children had bedrooms in my house. I had a basement with a window at ankle height. Theo stayed 2 steps behind me through every room and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the house was not already saying louder. On the back porch, I sat on the top step and looked at the ocean. It had been there for 2 years. Every morning I stood in my apartment watching shoes walk past my window. This water had been here, moving and breathing, 40 minutes away. Behind a coral door, waiting, Theo sat beside me. After a while, he asked, "What do you want to do?" Everything Grandpa told me to do. Everything my mother stopped me from doing. I almost picked up my phone and called Pearl to ask why. But asking Pearl why she did something cruel was like trying to find the beginning of a circle. There was no starting point, only the continuous line of what she had always been. The next Monday, Arlo's attorney confirmed everything. The deed was filed with the county 2 years ago. Vera Langford, sole owner. No liens, no encumbrances, no competing claims. The house had been mine from the moment Arlo signed the paperwork, and it would have been mine on my 25th birthday if Pearl had done the one thing her father asked her to do, hand the keys to the right daughter. Arlo's attorney was a woman named Catherine Brill, who had worked for him for 15 years and spoke about property law the way surgeons speak about incisions, precisely, without emotion, and with the understanding that every word had consequences. She confirmed the deed, and then, as part of a standard property review, she searched the beach house address online. She found the Airbnb listing within 2 minutes. Active listing under Ingrid Langford's name. 2 years of guest reviews. Summer rentals at an average of $4,500 a month. 3 months each summer, 2 consecutive years. The listing had photos of the kitchen, the back porch, the ocean view, the master bedroom with fresh linens, and a welcome basket on the nightstand. Guests described the house as spotless and beautifully maintained and exactly as pictured. They gave it 4.7 stars. They left tips about the best coffee shop in town and the walking path to the beach. Not one of those guests knew they were sleeping in a house that belonged to a woman who had never set foot inside it. A woman who was paying rent on a room 14 miles away with a ceiling she could touch standing on her toes while strangers rated her ocean view. $27,000. Collected by my sister. From my property, under my roof, without my knowledge, my consent, or a single dollar reaching my account. Arlo was quiet when Catherine told him. He sat in his study and listened, and his jaw tightened, and his hand gripped the armrest of his chair, and when Catherine finished, he spoke in the register I had only heard once before, years ago, when a contractor tried to overcharge his foundation. Prepare a demand letter for the full amount, and a 30-day notice to vacate. I want both served by Friday. Ingrid was served on day 5. She called Pearl within the hour. Arlo's attorney relayed Ingrid's response to me. Did you know he was checking? And Pearl's response, I did not think he would check. They had built the entire scheme on a single assumption, that nobody would look. Vera was in a basement, and basements do not generate questions. Houses generate questions. But basements generate only sympathy, and sympathy is the quietest form of control because the person being pitied never realizes they are being managed. But the Airbnb income was only the surface layer. Catherine noticed something else while reviewing the financial trail attached to the property: regular transfers of $800 a month from Ingrid's account to Pearl's personal account. Not rent, not a family contribution, not a gift. A payment, consistent, monthly, going back 14 months. A recurring transfer that tells a story even when nobody is willing to narrate it. Arlo called me on a Tuesday afternoon, Catherine on speaker. There is something else going on between your mother and your sister. The money from the house is flowing in 2 directions. Catherine found regular payments from Ingrid to Pearl, $800 a month, 14 months running. I was sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot, still in my scrubs, the phone pressed to my ear. A woman walked past with a bulldog on a leash. Cars moved through the lot. Normal afternoon. And my grandfather was on the phone telling me that the theft of my house had layers underneath it that I had not imagined, that my mother and my sister had built a financial arrangement on my property that went beyond a stolen set of keys and into territory that had its own monthly payment schedule. What does that mean? Catherine answered. It means your mother has been receiving income derived from your property. The reason is unclear from the transfer records alone. But the pattern is consistent enough to suggest an ongoing arrangement, not a series of gifts. The twist was not that Pearl stole my house. The twist was why. And the answer to that question was sitting in a bank statement at Pearl's house, waiting for someone to ask the right question at the wrong dinner. If you are still listening, stay with this story on Family Secret Tales, because what Pearl was doing with the Airbnb money is the reason she stole my house in the first place, and the person who exposed it was not me. It was my father. At his own kitchen table. On day 8, I drove to Pearl's house alone. Theo offered to come, and I told him I needed to do this standing on my own floor, with my own voice, and nobody beside me to lean on. The coral keys were in my jacket pocket. The folder Arlo's attorney Catherine had prepared was on the passenger seat, property records. Airbnb listing screenshots with guest reviews and dates, the demand letter copy, and the eviction notice. The drive took 25 minutes, and for every one of them I sat with the folder beside me and the keys pressing against my hip, and the understanding that the person who pulled into Pearl's driveway was not the same person who had left that Thanksgiving table 8 days ago. The woman at Thanksgiving had been confused. The woman in this car was certain. Pearl opened the door wearing a sweater and jeans, her face arranged into something working hard to look composed. Ingrid was already on the couch, with her arms crossed and her jaw set, the posture of someone who has been rehearsing defenses for 8 days and still cannot find one that holds. Douglas sat in the armchair with reading glasses on his forehead, looking at me with the passive confusion of a man who has spent 32 years choosing not to see the things his wife does to his younger daughter. We can work this out as a family, Vera. There is no need to involve attorneys in private family matters. I sat down, opened the folder, placed the deed on the coffee table, then the Airbnb listing printout with Ingrid's profile photo and the property address visible. Then 3 pages of reviews printed in a column, guests describing stays in a house they called beautiful, and steps from the ocean. $27,000, Ingrid, 2 summers. From a house deeded to me, listed under your name, rented to strangers who left reviews about the ocean view from my porch. Ingrid uncrossed her arms and shifted forward on the couch. I maintained that property for 2 years, Vera. The yard, the pipes, the gutters, the winter prep. If I had not been there, the place would have fallen apart. Nobody was using it. Nobody was using it because nobody told me it was mine, and maintaining a property does not require a guest checkout calendar and a 4.7-star rating. You rented my house to strangers and kept every dollar. Ingrid's jaw tightened. I put 2 years of real work into that house. You put 2 years of someone else's equity into your bank account. And you listed it on Airbnb under your own name on a property where the deed says Vera Langford. That is not maintenance, Ingrid. That is income from a property you had no legal right to occupy, improve, or lease to anyone. Pearl leaned forward on the couch. Vera, your sister has 2 children. She needed somewhere stable to raise them. The house was sitting empty, and somebody had to make a practical decision for this family. The house was not sitting empty because nobody wanted it. It was sitting empty because you never told me it existed. You took the keys Grandpa gave you for me and handed them to Ingrid. You watched me sign a lease for a room with 1 window. You watched me ride the bus to work every morning. You watched me cash Grandpa's birthday check to cover rent because I thought $500 was all he gave me. And you said nothing. For 2 years, Mom, not a word, not a hint. Not a single moment where you looked at your daughter living in a room she could barely afford and thought maybe she should know about the house with her name on it 40 minutes away. Pearl's voice tightened. You are making this sound worse than it was. How would you describe it? Pearl opened her mouth and closed it. The question sat between us on the coffee table next to the deed and the Airbnb reviews, and Pearl could not answer it because every honest answer was an admission, and every dishonest answer would collapse under the weight of the documents sitting 3 feet in front of her. The room was still. Pearl had run out of justifications and Ingrid had run out of defenses, and the documents on the coffee table were doing the talking now. Each page a fact that could not be argued with or explained away or reframed as a practical decision made for the good of the family. I turned to Douglas. Dad, did you know about the Airbnb income? Douglas straightened in the armchair. What Airbnb income? Ingrid rented my house on Airbnb during the summers. $27,000 over 2 years, and $800 a month of that went from Ingrid's account to Mom's. Did you know? Douglas looked at Pearl. Pearl was looking at the coffee table. Pearl, what is the $800? Pearl's hands went to her lap. The same motion from Thanksgiving, folding, unfolding, the napkin that was not there. It is a loan payment. The room shifted. Douglas took his phone from the side table, opened his banking app, and scrolled. His thumb stopped. He turned the screen toward Pearl. There is a lender on our joint credit report I have never seen. $800 a month for 14 months. Pearl, what is this? Pearl spoke without looking up. 18 months ago, I invested $40,000 in a business opportunity, a product distribution company. It failed after 4 months. I lost everything. I took out a personal loan to cover the loss. The payments are $800 a month. Some of the Airbnb income helped cover them. The room changed. The air got heavier. Douglas stared at his phone, then at Pearl, then at the column of numbers on his screen. You invested $40,000 we did not have. You lost it. You took out a loan I knew nothing about. And you used our daughter's house, a house your own father bought for Vera, to make the payments? Pearl's fingers pressed against her thighs. I was going to tell you. Douglas's voice stayed low, and the evenness of it was worse than shouting. You were going to tell me. You were going to tell Vera about the house. You were going to pay Dad back. Pearl, what have you actually done? Because the only thing I can see you did is take your daughter's property, give it to your other daughter, collect the income, hide a $40,000 debt, and let Vera pay rent on a room where she can touch the ceiling standing on her toes. Pearl opened her mouth and nothing came out. Douglas set the phone on the armrest, screen up, the loan payments glowing in the dim room. I stood. The keys pressed through my jacket pocket against my hip. The folder stayed on the table because the documents belonged to this room now. They belonged to the silence between Douglas and Pearl, and the space between Ingrid and the Airbnb listing she had managed, and the distance between the family I thought I had and the family that had been making decisions about my life without ever asking me what I wanted. 2 years. I lived in a room with one window at ankle level and a ceiling I could reach, standing on my toes. I rode the bus to work in the dark every morning at 6:40. I cashed Grandpa's birthday check to cover rent because I thought $500 was all he gave me. And the entire time, my house sat 40 minutes away with my sister living in it, renting it to strangers for $4,500 a month, and sending $800 of that to my mother to cover a failed investment nobody in this room knew about. You did not give Ingrid my house because she needed it, Mom. You gave her my house because you needed the income. And the whole time, you told everyone I could not handle a beach house because I clean animal cages for $36,000 a year. The woman who cleans animal cages is the only person in this room who has been paying her own bills with money she actually earned. Nobody at this table can say the same. Pearl gripped the armrest. Her knuckles whitened. You said I would sit in it alone and wait for someone to visit. You said I could not even get there without a ride, Ingrid. You said Grandpa made a nice gesture, and you made sure it went to good use. The nice gesture was a house worth $850,000 with my name on every legal document filed at the county clerk's office. What went to waste was 2 years of my life in a room where I could hear the upstairs tenant's footsteps at 3 a.m. while my ocean was 40 minutes away behind a door that matched the keys you were carrying in your purse. Ingrid tried one more time. Vera, I took care of that house. You maintained my house with my deed, my keys, and my front door. The only thing missing was me. I am here now. Pearl's eyes were damp, but her mouth was set. She was not going to let this become about her feelings, because this conversation had stopped being about Pearl's feelings the moment those keys hit the hardwood floor at Thanksgiving. Ingrid has 30 days to vacate. The demand for the Airbnb income is with Grandpa's attorney. Mom, the $40,000 is between you and Dad now. It is no longer between you and my house. I am moving in on December 1st. And the next time someone in this family decides what I can or cannot handle, remember that I handled 2 years in a room smaller than your walk-in closet without asking any of you for a single dollar. I did not need your permission to survive that. I do not need your permission to live in my own house. I stood, picked up my jacket. The coral keys pressed against my ribs as I put it on. Douglas sat with his phone face down on the armrest, staring at a spot on the carpet between his feet. Pearl had not moved from the couch. Ingrid was looking at the Airbnb reviews on the coffee table, at the words beautiful home and perfect getaway left by strangers who had paid money to sleep in rooms that belonged to her sister. I walked to the door, opened it, stepped through it, and closed it behind me. The cold November air hit my face. My car sat in the driveway. The keys in my pocket belonged to a coral door 40 minutes away, and on December 1st I would put them in the lock and walk into a house that had been waiting for me for 2 years. 4 days later, Pearl called. Her voice was calm, measured, carefully constructed over 4 days of silence. Vera, I want to make this right. Ingrid will pay you half the Airbnb income. $13,500, and I will help with the property taxes going forward. We can put this behind us and move on as a family. I almost accepted, not because the offer was fair, but because the words split almost slid past me the way words do when you are tired and the person speaking them sounds like your mother and your body still wants to believe that mothers act in good faith. But Pearl said split as if she had earned half, as if living in someone else's house and renting it without permission created a claim she could negotiate from. As if 2 years of occupation generated equity in a property she had no name on. The word broke the offer before Pearl finished the sentence. How long were you going to let me rent that room before you told me I owned a house? 3 seconds of silence. Not the silence where someone is thinking of what to say. The silence where someone has been asked the one question they have no answer for. I hung up. Pearl did not call back. The offer died on the phone line, and the word split hung in the air between us like a door that had closed and neither of us would reach for again. Catherine served Ingrid the formal demand for the full Airbnb income the following week. The money was gone. Ingrid had spent it. A portion went to Pearl for loan payments. A portion went to furniture for my house bought with income from my house. A portion went to daily expenses that accumulate when you are living rent-free and treating someone else's property as your personal revenue stream. She sat at her kitchen table with the demand letter and a calculator, and the numbers confirmed what she already knew. She called Pearl. No answer. She called again the next morning. Voicemail. Pearl had stopped answering calls that required her to explain where the money went, which meant Pearl had stopped answering most of her calls entirely. Douglas slept in the guest room for 11 nights. On the first night, he carried a pillow and a blanket from the master bedroom and closed the guest room door without saying anything to Pearl. And Pearl heard the click of the latch and sat on the edge of their bed and understood that the sound of a guest room door closing is different when the guest is your husband. For 11 mornings, Pearl made breakfast and set it on the kitchen counter. Douglas ate it standing up because sitting across from her at the table meant starting a conversation neither of them was ready for. He went to work. He came home. He walked the dog. He slept in the guest room. The house ran on routine and silence and the specific gravity of a $40,000 lie sitting between two people who had been married for 32 years. On the 12th morning, Douglas sat down at the table. He did not mention the loan. He said, "The dog needs to go to the vet." Pearl nodded. They drove together. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was two people who had discovered that the distance between the master bedroom and the guest room is measured in trust, not feet, and that rebuilding either one takes longer than 11 nights. Ingrid vacated the beach house on day 32. She hired movers because the furniture was too much for her car and her husband's truck combined. The couch she had bought with money from my property went into a storage unit. The curtains she had hung in my living room went into garbage bags. The family photos came off the hallway wall, and the nail holes stayed, small, dark circles in the paint that marked the outline of a life she had built in someone else's house. She left the place clean. The counters wiped, the floors swept, the refrigerator empty. The only trace of her was the child's seashell magnet still stuck to the fridge, forgotten in the rush. I left it there for 2 weeks before I put it in an envelope and mailed it to her without a note. 5 weeks after the confrontation, Ingrid drove to the beach house. She still knew the route by muscle memory, the turn off the coastal highway, the street with the speed bump, the bend where the ocean first becomes visible through the trees. The coral front door was the same color it had always been, but there was a new welcome mat, a hanging planter with herbs that Theo had put up. The mailbox had V, Langford stenciled on the side in black letters that caught the afternoon sun. Ingrid pulled into the driveway and stopped. Through the front window, she could see a lamp she had never seen before, a bookshelf that was not hers, and a throw blanket on a couch that was not the couch she had chosen. The photos were gone from the hallway. The curtains she had hung were replaced with something lighter. The house looked the same from the outside and completely different from within, the way a house looks when the person who owns it finally starts living in it. She sat in the car for 2 minutes with the engine running. 2 years of mornings in that kitchen. 2 years of watching the ocean from that porch. 2 years of calling that house hers and believing that saying it enough times would make it true. The mailbox said otherwise. The deed had always said otherwise. She reversed out of the driveway and drove to the apartment she was renting now. $1,400 a month, 3rd floor, no ocean, no coral door, and a kitchen window that faced a parking lot. Pearl sits in her kitchen now. The laptop is open and the loan statement glows on the screen. Balance $31,200. The payment is due in 9 days. Douglas has not mentioned it in 2 weeks, which is not the same as forgetting. Ingrid is not sending $800 a month anymore because Ingrid no longer has a property to rent. The coral keychain left Pearl's world on a Thanksgiving evening when it hit a hardwood floor and landed at the feet of the person it was always meant for. Pearl closes the laptop. The house that was supposed to fund her debt belongs to someone else now. It always did. Saturday morning. I am standing in the kitchen of the beach house. My beach house. Coffee in a mug I bought at a thrift store on the drive down here. White ceramic with a chip on the handle. $2. Theo is on the porch reading a book he has been halfway through for 6 weeks because he reads 3 pages and then falls asleep in the salt air. And the sound of waves beneath his reading is the sound of a life I did not know was waiting for me. The coral front door is open. Ocean air moves through the house, through rooms I own and have filled with things I chose. The keys hang on a hook by the door, coral keychain against white wall. Arlo visited last Sunday. He sat on the back porch and drank coffee and looked at the water and said, "This is what I wanted for you." He stayed 2 hours. He did not mention Pearl. The ceiling in this kitchen is 9 feet high. In my old apartment, standing on my toes, my fingertips could brush the ceiling, and the plaster was cool and close, and that was the size of everything I had. Here, the space above me is wide and open and mine. I do not reach for it. I do not need to measure what I have by what I can touch. The key that turned in the lock on December 1st is on the hook where it belongs. The coral color matches the door. The door is open. The ocean is behind it. And I am home. If this story reminded you of someone who held your keys and let you believe you did not deserve a door, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you have not already, subscribe to Family Secret Tales. Some doors were always yours. The only thing missing was the person who was supposed to hand you the keys.